So I'm going to call us back into order. Next on our agenda, we are lucky enough to have the head of Bowser and the DNR with us to give us some thoughts on what they're thinking probably about how we interact appropriately and better. But I don't know. I didn't script your presentation, but we're delighted to have you here and see you here and willing to engage in conversations with us. So with that, I'll turn it over to the heads of our two most important conservation partners, governmental partners in the state, Sarah and John.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair and council members. I'm Sarah Strommen. I'm the Commissioner of the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources.
John Jaschke, Executive Director, Board of Water and Soil Resources.
So, Mr. Chair, in all honesty, you scared me a little bit there with your introduction. I'm not sure we're here to help you act appropriately. That sounds like a different talk, but we are here to share some thoughts on what we see as opportunities for the Outdoor Heritage Fund and some of the perspectives that we have as state agencies doing this work. And we're really pleased for this opportunity, so appreciate the invitation. I think this was the specific questions that Mark posed to us regarding our perspectives on what we think the council's priorities for future funding should be. Should the council be refining funding priorities either geographically or by habitat type of project or practice or species? And then there were some specific questions about our thoughts on partnerships with local units of government and non-governmental organizations. So we're going to do our best to cover those questions, try to answer them, share a few thoughts, and then we hope to have some discussion as well. So I think first and foremost, we really want to acknowledge the council for the really good work that has come out of this body, out of all of the partners that are using Outdoor Heritage Fund, and to acknowledge the importance of this opportunity and the legacy work that's going on. Really, you know, we have the opportunity to interact with colleagues from across the country. And one of the things that I think sometimes we forget in Minnesota is that it is an opportunity, it is a privilege, it is a luxury that we even get to be having this conversation about how to best prioritize resources, how to best deploy our resources to ensure Minnesota's outdoor heritage legacy. There are other states that don't even have those resources to have the discussion about how to prioritize them. And so we appreciate the opportunity for this conversation, but want to acknowledge that that in and of itself puts Minnesota at the forefront of many places. So how we want to focus this presentation is we want to talk a little bit about the opportunities that we see for strategic work, and we're going to use some examples of that for targeted work and collaborative work. And we think that these three themes have really been hallmarks of the Outdoor Heritage Fund work to date. And so we'll highlight what we see as some of those kind of signature projects, and then we'll talk about what the opportunities are ahead.
And well, you know, if you think that we're here with a whole bunch of problems and big ideas that we got to make dramatic changes, you're probably going to be disappointed, because I think, you know, by and large, what we see anyway is that things are going well. However, you know, there's probably more we can do in some areas, and we thought we would try and, you know, capture those to the best of our ability. As the Commissioner mentioned, you know, there's many others that are involved in all of this work, starting with your work, frankly, because it starts with your decisions as to what to do, and then the rest of us figure out how to do it and make sure the results are what you expect. You know, a strategy, you know, of course, takes a little bit higher look at things generally, and, you know, there are a couple components of that we've thought about that we think are worth pondering, maybe a little bit backward looking and maybe more so forward looking as we walk through this presentation. But among the things that we see, I think opportunities ahead, you know, this is, these are public funds. This is the people's money. You know, how much can we do with that is always a question we ask ourselves, is how much more can we do with what you've given us to do the work that you've commissioned. Among those things that we think have happened and I think are worth contemplating going forward is is the idea that we're going to get more than one thing accomplished with your dollars, either by partnering it with someone else's money in many cases, or some expertise or some time that others have to offer. We are obviously focused on habitat, in the various forms and definitions of that with these dollars, but clearly we know that, natural systems work together. We've heard a lot about the excess rainfall this year in Minnesota, maybe some other places. We can hold and store water with dollars that are also going to provide habitat. We can do habitat with dollars that are also going to do clean water work. And so we've been doing some of that already, and we'll show you a few examples. I mentioned the leveraging. It takes many forms. Sometimes, we are asked, or you're asking us to show you what those other, specific funding sources are, but it isn't always going to be another appropriation from another place. It can be local dollars that are coming from private sources. It can be funds that are coming in terms of time that somebody has or expertise that they've got that we could otherwise, have to pay for. So I think donations of various forms are important to this. People ask, what should we do? Should we fund one-off things? And you've done some of that. Should we fund programmatic endeavors? And you've done quite a bit of that. I don't think that there's an either or in that, really. I think that certainly the programmatic approach has some advantages. We've seen some one-offs become more programmatic over time too, so it's important to allow innovation and new ideas to come into the equation as well. Programmatic allows us to set up some funding from other sources perhaps in advance. It allows us to plan better and build the infrastructure of people or other mechanisms that are important to actually accomplish the work, whether it's buying the land, restoring the land, et cetera. And so the systematic is certainly, in our opinion anyway, a way to continue doing this work. I wouldn't rule out any of the other ideas as well. And the Commissioner may talk about the Conservation Legacy Program too. The small grants program is really, really well equipped to accomplish some of those one-offs that you can get something done and not have to, continue it. It's a one-off all on its own. Finally, I just mentioned that, the science, certainly there's a lot of, biology and other work that's gone into some of the things that, you've taken advantage of, I would say, in a good way. The plans that have been prepared in the past for various species or landscapes, and I think some of them were presented to you, I know, in years gone by, and hopefully maybe down the road as they get those plans updated, various plans, probably more from the DNR than other places, but many of the non-government organizations and others have contributed their science to those plans that we use to guide our work, particularly about where to do the work and in some cases how to do the work. I'll also mention that on a site-specific basis there is science being used to design projects too. Here's an example of one up in northwestern Minnesota that's been completed and is functioning. The design work to how to restore this stream or river system was, brought to the local officials who are going to actually be the project sponsors, in this case the Watershed District, but they also use the expertise of the DNR and other biologists to figure out exactly how to do that design well. That project has I think it's the first one that had a direct appropriation from the council and also from the Clean Water Fund. And they would tell you that was probably a bit of a challenge just administratively to get the money from more than one source to do, a project that had multiple benefits and purposes. I don't have all the details of how many dollars came from exactly which piece or what part of this project, but certainly it has a habitat benefit, particularly the in-stream aspect of it, which is what your funding was for. The Clean Water Fund, I think, paid for some of the land acquisition around that floodplain. And then they added, as the Watershed District, some components of their own that had to do with recreation, that could, otherwise not be included in a project that was using those two other state sources. So, again, there's probably, dozens of these. Sometimes, in this case, the appropriation was actually dedicated to this specific project from those two sources, and there's probably many others, I know there are, where they've taken your funding and used other funding, even other state funding, to accomplish the project in total and get more than one thing accomplished on the same footprint. And I just thought I'd highlight one more thing. I was up to Thief River Falls just a couple of weeks ago and met with the Red River Water Management Board, and some people have, asked if wildlife habitat and water management can be done, compatibly. And the answer, of course, is sometimes they can, oftentimes they can. And Representative Fabian is here, he knows it better than anybody, but that part of the state's been inundated, it seems like for a very long time now, several years, and this fall was as bad as it's ever been, worse than normal for sure. And these are just some numbers that I got, not because of your money going into these projects, but, the kind of work that you're funding certainly leads to projects like these. The Agassiz federal property stored a bunch of water, as you can see here, and the state WMA also did that. And these are long-standing, important habitat areas, but they are managed as compatibly as they can be with the objectives of the Watershed District, which is also about managing the flooding, which to protect property and people's safety. So we can do these things together. Whether we have the money together or not isn't necessarily always the issue. It's how we plan and prepare to do this work together.
So another example that we'd just like to highlight of, how we take a really strategic approach to work, take the science and the collaboration and achieve multiple benefits is the work that you all have funded in the St. Louis River Estuary and the St. Louis River Restoration Initiative. This really is, as you know, you've funded it as a program really to achieve a strategic vision for the estuary as a diverse and productive and healthy ecosystem, incorporating both the St. Louis River and the watershed. This is a really visible public project. The Duluth Harbor is a very busy place. It's a very visible place. The city of Duluth has poured a lot of investment and effort into revitalization of its waterfront, including the St. Louis River and the estuary. And so, from a strategic standpoint, this is a project that really makes sense. And we've been able to apply science around not only the remediation, but piggyback on that opportunity to achieve habitat restoration through those partnerships. The work here now, I think we're starting to see the ultimate recovery of that with the lake sturgeon populations. The fisheries are coming back. We're working on wild rice restoration. And then I think there's the whole community revitalization, which is one of those benefits that, isn't the intended purpose of this fund, but is happening as a result of that. The leverage here has been really another key component to leverage those federal remediation dollars, but also federal restoration dollars. We've leveraged for every dollar Lessard-Sams has put into that. We've leveraged about $1.19 in federal funds. And I learned just on my way over here that Senator Klobuchar and Senator Smith have just announced another $1.75 million for Great Lakes restoration to Minnesota. So this work is continuing to leverage those federal funds and continuing to generate success. I think, this project also is a really good example of the way that organizations collaborate. Not only do we have federal and state governments, but we have two state governments in there. We have Wisconsin DNR and Minnesota. We have communities. We have the city of Duluth and the city of Superior. We have tribal governments participating, and we have a host of non-governmental organizations as well. And so really the net result here is not only do we have this healthy ecosystem, we have more people now using this area for recreation too. And so I think when you think about the legacy and those outcomes that the public hopes to see from funds like the Outdoor Heritage Fund, this is a really great example of that achieving those goals. So we wanted to talk a little bit about targeting the work too. And really targeting is about putting the limited resources that we have where they can do the most good. Obviously, we're focused directly on the good for wildlife, but there, as you're going to hear, there's a whole host of other benefits that come from that targeting. And one of those opportunities really in targeting is, again, building on the science and where the plans are telling us we can do the most good, but also building upon investments that we've made previously so that those investments collectively add up to something bigger than they would as individual investments. One of the projects that we just want to highlight in this, because I think it's a really good example of being able to target and build on past investments, and then achieve not only wildlife benefits and habitat benefits, but other benefits as well, as the Worthington Wells project. And I know you're all familiar with this, and we talk about this one a lot, but it's because it's a great example. And I'll pop up the map here. This, and the colors will be hard to see here, but if you look, you can see in the orange color, there's DNR wildlife management areas. This Worthington Wells project became wildlife management area, but you'll also see the federal U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service wildlife production areas in the white, and then the public utility lands, Worthington public utility lands. So this area is the wellhead area for the city of Worthington. It is very important in terms of conservation to preserve that drinking water source for the city. It's also, as you see, an important wildlife habitat complex. And so the opportunity is, by targeting efforts to this location, we can achieve not only those wildlife benefits, but also those water quality and community benefits for the city of Worthington. And then ultimately, that helps that community to achieve economic outcomes, continue to be the hunting destination that it is, so that people are getting out, enjoying that habitat as well, and the community receives the economic benefit from that. The other advantage of really targeting this and building upon the prior investments is the efficiencies we gain in land management activities. So obviously, we're there, whether we're managing 40 acres or we're managing 4,000 acres, it's easier to manage as blocks with fewer boundaries, fewer neighboring landowners, those kinds of things. And when we can partner with other public entities, whether it be local entities or federal entities, that is of benefit as well. And then we wanted to provide an example of locally led activity as well, and how when we provide some investment at the state and can provide the science and provide some targeting direction, how local entities can pick that up. And I think to this question too of, is it important for the council to continue to fund non-governmental partners and local government partners? I think this is a great example of why we would say yes to both of those questions. So in this project, this is in Redwood County, and this is work that the Redwood SWCD is doing. And if you look at this, you'll see the red shows the state-owned land. And primarily what you'll notice is those are along the river corridors, Minnesota River, the Redwood River, and Cottonwood River. And what that allows the local SWCD to do is really target their work on conservation easements and rim easements to build on those investments that the state has already made to achieve better habitat corridors along those riparian areas, as well as to achieve the water quality benefits that they're interested in as well. And so you'll see then those permanent easements in yellow, they are building along those riparian corridors where the state has already made an investment to continue to provide those multiple benefits in those targeted areas.
Yeah, and actually, Commissioner and I were at the Soil and Water Conservation District meeting this morning, and I happened to walk by, and this is something that's walk-in access. I know some of you are very familiar with this, and we got this started, I think Commissioner Holston, when you were around, it was an important get-going thing because we had this federal opportunity, and your funding doesn't actually do any of this, okay? But what it does do is it provides the basis upon which you can do this, someone else can do this, and so those lands that are, even the ones that are in private ownership, this walk-in access program has, because of the DNR's work to go get federal funding and to work with the local soil and water districts who talk to landowners into how this can work for them, we've added some additional, recreational opportunities, as the Commissioner mentioned, to get people outside and to enjoy the the things that, we've built or are going to make better. So just wanted to add that ad lib to the presentation. I hope that works for the people watching it elsewhere. But if you don't know what the walk-in access program is, I'm sure you can look it up on the DNR's website.
We'd be happy to tell you about it.
And the commissioner mentioned a couple of examples, of different versions of targeting, kind of targeting for multiple benefits, targeting for connectivity. I'm going to mention one that's, targeted at a resource-specific issue, which is the wild rice. It's obviously a important, natural resource in Minnesota in particular. And it's got lots of commercial reasons, but also, other cultural reasons that it's important. And what we've come to know through the science that's been done up in the north central part of the state is that these places where this rice is growing well are sensitive to disturbance of the wrong kind, and that typically ends up being development on the shore. And so the fisheries staff and the local governments and the forestry people all have gotten together and just, assess this landscape and determine here's the most important areas and here's the most risks that we have associated with that landscape, and tried to take your funding along with other funding and target it to these places, to these specific parcels along these shoreland areas to protect this important resource. And so this example I can just highlight here real quickly is just one. Okay, I mean, we can show you, dozens because they're all, unique. They all work through a voluntary approach, in a partnership that includes not only the agencies but also a number of the conservation partners that are in the non-government arena. In this case, this example shows, a WMA, basically being expanded, but there's many other places where we also have, the private conservation easement is acquired through either our Reinvest in Minnesota program. There's been other conservation easements also acquired in that landscape. And so this one, you're looking at obviously one resource or, the wild rice, but there's, other benefits that come with that as well with the fisheries and other perhaps even recreational opportunities if people are using wild ricing as one of those. So that collaboration, it's going to be a theme you're going to hear about, from the beginning to the end of our presentation. So why is that important? Because, nobody can go alone and nobody should go it alone. And, there's important expertise and assets that different organizations can bring to any of these projects or programs or how we want to describe them that you're, helping us achieve. Listening to the people is really an important part of this, and we'll probably talk more about that too. I certainly the people spoke when this amendment was passed, now 11, 12 years ago, whatever it is. If you look at my calendar, I could probably give you the exact date, but it was November of 2008. Since then, though, we also got to listen to what they're telling us to do. Certainly the expertise in this room and beyond can help us figure out how to do it once you all and others determine, what's going to be funded. But it's important to build community support for these projects and practices as well, because and land acquisition too, because the people are the ones in the end that are going to be the beneficiaries of this. People today, and of course people hopefully for a very, very long time here in Minnesota. And so including them in the process is a really important part of it. An example that we share with you, because examples sometimes are easier to talk about than, generalities. And so most of you are familiar with this Camp Ripley installation, National Guard installation in central Minnesota, which of course hosts, a bunch of other military users of that property, along with, of course, the State Patrol, the DNR, I think MnDOT. I mean, there's a whole array of different functions that go on at this base, but it is, 95% of it is in natural condition, right? It's a very important natural resource area as well. But in order to keep this base functioning, they have to be able to operate, the military equipment, which is obviously loud and can be a disturbance to people who aren't used to it or are too close to it. And so over the past 10 or 15 years, the Camp Ripley installation, along with a lot of help from the federal partners to fund it, but more importantly with local agents to work with landowners, has been able to identify parcels of land that could be set aside for conservation or in some cases continued farming, so that those are compatible with that military installation and with the natural resources that are part of it as well. And so this This began as an Army-compatible use buffer program. It's now evolved into a Sentinel landscape partnership that is, one of the highlights across the nation, actually, in terms of the military working with local conservation groups and, achieving this genuine partnership of achieving both objectives and the public benefit. So just a couple of numbers here. In the Morrison Soil and Water Conservation District, they get a lot of help on this, from the agencies, but also from Nature Conservancy and others that have been helpful in working up, ideas about how to make this be well received. The local governments, the Soil and Water District in particular, has received $37.9 million from the federal agencies. And another small amount just got added this past year, I think $2.8 million from USDA as well. So this is it's a working landscape in many ways. The military is a working endeavor. It's important to the commerce and economic vitality of central Minnesota. The farms that are surrounding this area, as long as they're farming in a compatible way with the military work, which is what it is, they get to keep farming, and the important natural resources then become protected through these conservation easements and a small amount of land acquisition. Oh, I'm sorry, Sarah.
Sorry.
You did that. So this is just an aerial view. And of course, what goes right down the side of this area is the Mississippi River. This is, still arguably the headwaters of this river system. And that landscape that's being protected, of course, is also benefiting the aquatic habitat that's in this very important, unique river system, of course. And it also has recreational value as well. So I think they've told me that they've got 27,000 acres of land protected there now, which is, really going to be an important piece of our central Minnesota landscape for a long, long time.
We wanted to provide an example, too, of work that's being done through the Conservation Partners Legacy Grant Program. But before I get into that, I want to expand a little bit on this concept of collaboration and why we think it's really important, particularly in the acquisition realm on DNR acquisitions, to have NGO collaborative partners on that work. And I know it's a topic that comes up. It was one of the questions we were specifically asked. How does that coordination work? How does that collaboration work? And how does the DNR choose to do acquisitions directly itself versus have a partner? And I think really, part of the goal of this, or one of the benefits anyway, of the outdoor heritage work really is building the capacity and enhancing the collaborative nature of conservation work in Minnesota. And one of the things that, and I shared this with the Soil and Water Districts this morning, that I think is so unique about Minnesota is the broad collaboration we have. We have collaboration at multiple levels of government with different, federal, state, and local entities working together. We have collaboration between state agencies, and we have collaboration in public-private partnerships, and that's with, public agencies and non-governmental organizations as well as private landowners. And I think, recognizing the strength of those collaborations we have in Minnesota is really important, and the opportunity that the Outdoor Heritage Fund has had to really enhance those collaborations. And as John said, the local aspect of this is so important. Making sure that people at the most local level feel engaged in this work and a connection is really what this is all about. And so to have those acquisition partners, whether it's a local Pheasants Forever chapter or a DU chapter, or it's a local sportsman's club, having them take the opportunity to work on acquisitions that are really important to them at the local level and their local members, I think is a tremendous opportunity, and I think that's one of the benefits of this fund. So when we have those opportunities and have those organizations that are doing that work, we encourage that. When there are more complex organizations, sometimes that statewide nonprofit organizations can help with, we take advantage of those opportunities. And then there are other types of acquisitions where really the DNR is able and situated to do ourselves. And so I know sometimes it's hard to understand that coordination from the outside, but it really does work very well. And we meet on a regular basis to make sure that we're doing that as efficiently and effectively as possible. And I think really then the extension of that is the Conservation Legacy Partners Grant Program, which is designed to give those smaller local organizations an opportunity to do projects. And as John said, some of them are one-off projects. And that's one of the opportunities, but it also collectively really is a program about increasing the local capacity for conservation and increasing the local involvement for conservation. And in many cases, these local projects would not happen without the CPL program and those dollars being made available to them. So we have one project here to highlight with the Vermilion River Watershed Joint Powers Organization. This is a collaborative work with Farmington Parks and Recreation, City Environmental Staff, Dakota County SWCD staff, and the Vermilion River Watershed JPO, as well as our DNR trout stream habitat folks. This particular project, the South Creek Stream Habitat Restoration, is a trout stream tributary to the Vermilion River. So from a habitat perspective, it's a very important targeted place to make sure that we're maintaining trout stream habitat and those angling opportunities. And the goal here really was to provide new and improved habitat to improve the aeration, reduce stream temperatures, and stabilize eroding slopes. And so this is an example of the types of projects that we are able to do at the local level, but that have a much broader impact through the CPL program. And then one other example of collaboration that we wanted to highlight is the Big Rice Lake project, which you funded. Big Rice Lake is about a 2,000 acre shallow wild rice lake in St. Louis County. Historically, it was one of the best producing wild rice lakes in northeastern Minnesota. Due to changes in hydrology and sort of a stabilization of water levels that changed vegetation, it kind of diminished as a wild rice lake. It was taken over by pickerel weed. And so the abundance of the rice declined, which is a concern to waterfowl enthusiasts, wild rice harvesters, as well as our native communities who rely on rice gathering. So the opportunity here really was to go in and address the pickerel weed issue. What we found is if you cut it 2 times during the growing season for 2 years in a row, it really helped knock it back. But to do that, we needed additional resources, and the Outdoor Heritage Fund was able to provide those resources. This really was a great collaboration between the DNR and Fond du Lac and Bois Forte tribal communities as well. And I think if you look at the before and after pictures here, it's you'll see the quite dramatic change that we were able to affect here.
The commissioner mentioned how the acquisition piece. I should just mention how it works on the conservation easement side, at least through our agency, and I expect through others, which is, it's a voluntary program, obviously, and I'm sure it's the same way when you're acquiring land, regardless of the mechanism. But it doesn't happen in 1, 2, or 4 visits. This is a multiple, visit endeavor to talk to people about what's going to work for them and what you might be able to do to make something that they want to see happen for the public good as well. So there's a process. There's an application. Obviously, there's a scoring mechanism that is used to rank and evaluate the benefits, the habitat benefits, in particular when it comes to the outdoor heritage funding. And there's a batching process so we can align up the money and equipments from all the different sources, because often these acquisitions are using not only one source of money, but multiple sources of funding. And then we have to get the commitments to do the restoration work, because this land is being put back to something that it isn't currently. So, and then the allocation of those dollars occurs. And of course, we work with your staff to show them all the books and how that works. But it is a process that, as the commissioner mentioned, is done with multiple parties involved almost always. I think we've got that down and honed it pretty well over time. Certainly there's ways to keep looking at making it better, but that is a process that is important to be consistent with. Let me just mention a few more things, that, more of a summary, I guess. I think keep doing what you're doing. I mean, your work is difficult. You have, a million good ideas that come to you, and you can only, fund a subset of those. And so that's always going to be a challenge. I think we've tried to give you some demonstration that we are being strategic and targeted and collaborative. I don't think we say, the next hour I'm going to be collaborative or, tomorrow I'm going to be strategic. We just operate that way, as the commissioner mentioned. And so, we could probably do something more to prove that to you if you think that's important, but that is the way we operate. It is a standard operating procedure, I know, in our agency, and I know the commissioner would speak for hers as well, and the many partners too. So, and the partnerships are critical, everything from the landowner who may be involved, and or almost always is involved if it's going to be something on an acquisition, all the way up. And, we'd make a long list of those partners, but of course we would remember that we've missed somebody because, as the commissioner noted, one of the things that this fund has been able to do is reach a lot of organizations and people, and that's really important to keep allowing and making that more possible than it even is today. And then the last thing I think is, of course, we're doing good things, and we all know that. I think we might be interested in sitting down with you or your staff and talking about how we can, tell the story. Not, show the results. Yes, that's critical too, but tell it in a way that, people understand it and can appreciate it and know it, from even places, that are right in their backyard. I think sometimes those are the most effective ways of communicating, and we've been trying to make a considered effort on that in this the last year or two on the Clean Water Fund work because, there is a need to tell people what we're actually doing as opposed to just thinking that we're looking at things from a distant and only from a scientific perspective. That's critical, but showing them results is important too. So we'd like to talk with you more about that at some point down the road. And we talked about the multiple things that we get out of the legacy amendment in total, and even the Outdoor Heritage Fund alone, gives us some of the things that go beyond habitat. And the commissioner talked about the Worthington Wells, and there's other examples of that where drinking water, is protected because we're doing a good thing for habitat, and vice versa. To be honest, we have a clean water program where we're putting native grasses back to protect the wellhead areas, in southwestern Minnesota. That is going to be beneficial for habitat, everything from pollinators to bird species to pheasants. Recreation, kind of comes along for the ride, in this fund in particular, but it's a major emphasis to, give people a chance to use these important resources that you're enhancing, restoring, or making more of. We already talked about the water storage, and the commerce is also an important part of this in many ways. I mean, hunting and fishing, of course, alone generate a bunch of economic benefits, but there's other things that are going on around and including those properties that are maybe, not as quantifiable as some of those numbers might be. So, again, this is just reinforcing the point that we can do more than one thing on the footprint of Minnesota, and I think we're doing that, and we probably should keep doing even more of that.
So what we hope we've done is to try to stitch together, examples of a number of the projects that you have funded to show how we think, or how we see we have been strategic, targeted, and collaborative, and why those things matter and why we should continue to do them. But as John said, part of this is also about telling the story. And this story that Dennis Anderson recently wrote and the Star Tribune published, Brook Trout Rebound, a Surprise Success from Conservation Efforts, I think really is one of those stories where we can now take years of work to see that success yielded as a result of that work and to see brook trout populations rebound. So this is a great example. As I said, the St. Louis River estuary is another great example. They're now having bass fly fishing tournaments out on the estuary, as a demonstration of the success. And so this really is some of the stories we want to tell. And obviously, you all have funded for a number of years trout stream restoration work. Trout Unlimited obviously has been doing a lot of this work, as has the DNR. East Indian Creek is one of those projects that, in addition to other projects, have addressed these long population trends, the changes in stream hydrology, the changes in landscape, and then the result is over time we get to this rebound in the brook trout population. I think my hope is that someday this headline would not say a surprise success, but would say it's a success, right? I mean, I think that's really part of what we're saying here is we need to have that vision in mind, and we need to be telling these stories. And I think we're getting to the point now in the history of this work and the longevity of this work where that's going to be possible.
And just a little add-on to that last example, so your funding went to at least a part of an in-channel stream improvement project, right? The in-stream habitat, the lunker structures, whatever else Trout Unlimited did in that stream, they re-meandered part of it and restabilized a bank. But that what that slide shows you, you have to manage the watershed, right? And they've been working on improving that watershed for maybe longer than 20 years, certainly, in order to be able to make that in-stream habitat actually be as good as it can be and worth putting money into. And so you have to look at these things systematically. And so I think that's one of the messages too, is that we need to look at the whole habitat train, as you might describe it, from the farmer's field to the mouth of the river, exiting to the Mississippi River or where it ends up. And so all of that is a key part of making these things sustainable and frankly using the public's money wisely. And let me just end on that. I saw Commissioner Holston in the hallway briefly, and he said, "Are you having fun yet?" And the answer is, heck yeah. But we're also working really hard. This isn't, and it isn't always easy, and that's, that. And, when I think about the things that are a challenge sometimes, I just have to tell ourselves, as the Commissioner mentioned right at the beginning, these are good problems to have, whatever those problems might be, because we get to do something that, is an honor and a privilege, and frankly, we're very fortunate to be able to do. And so we look forward to doing a lot more of that going forward, and being able to share that good work, those results with others so they can understand it too. Thank you.
Great. Thank you both for being here. I imagine there might be a question or two from the council.
I don't really have a question, but this is pretty close to communication and outreach, as far as I can see. Let's take the example of the DNR. They're going to be collaborating in outdoor heritage, clean water, and trails. 3 out of the 4 areas that the amendment covers. So when we get to the point that we're going to be asking the voters to renew this thing, it's really going to be really important that all this stuff's chronicled, and it's nice that the stories are starting to be developed.
Great. Dan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks for being here. Director Jaschke, you talked about doing projects that have multi-benefits, and I don't think I'm blue in the face yet, but one of the things that we've talked a lot about with regards to flood mitigation projects is being able to design them so that they actually create wetlands so that we don't have to delineate for the wetlands. I've been frustrated by a lack of progress on that in the last 8 years or so. Can we move the ball on that at all? Can you explain to us a little bit about what may be holding us back?
Well, yeah. So this is getting a little bit more into the a policy area that is part of other statutes. But the laws of the nation and the state say if you fill a wetland for a development or other project, you have to replace it. Those have been around for since the Clean Water Act in the 70s, and the state since the 1990s. And so, but they also both say you can't use conservation money to offset that. You have to be able to. Otherwise you'd be sort of not gaining, is the way that originally that intention was, I guess, expressed as no net loss. That doesn't mean you can't do projects together. You just have to be very careful about the accounting for them. And we've done some of that, certainly. We've built an area that has become adjacent to a WMA and became part of WMA, for example. We have to be very careful about that so we don't run afoul of the federal or the state standards in that regard. Maybe the other part of your question or comment was, how do we build these projects that have these multiple benefits? And you've seen some of them where they've been able to build a habitat project that restores a stream. The stream meandering provides some flood control because you're, moving the water through a longer distance. But they also, in almost every case, and some of the folks are actually here who know more about than I do from the River Valley, so thanks for being here. See, Tracy came the furthest, I think, today. But, they also build these small setback levees to allow then the protection for the farmland too, or in some cases even bigger levees or structures to protect, city or other areas. So good design, good planning is what it begins with. And those projects don't happen overnight. As you know, they take years to be planned, and then the land and rights acquired, and then the designs and the construction to be accomplished. So I think good planning can help us do some more of those things that you're talking about.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Director Jaschke, would you hold up that yellow sign again for me? Thank you. Commissioner Strommen, you know that I'm, one of my big initiatives coming in the next legislative session, policy-wise, has to do with, we have a walk-in access program. We need a mobility access program that's streamlined and actually helps people become a part of, as Director Jaschke said, being able to enjoy the outdoors. My hunting partner doesn't have a left leg, and we need to streamline the process so that if he did happen to go out to someplace in western Minnesota and they're hunting on some private land and someone says, hey, let's go hunt the WMA, we need to be able to make sure that those people can do that. And I appreciate, look forward to your help with that. Thank you.
Great. Andrew?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Jaschke and Commissioner Strommen, I guess I'm a little curious about some of the CPL stuff. As a board member, one of the places that 9 out of 10 people that have a project that is up for consideration when it comes to funding fall within that or slightly above that 400,000, the people that I've talked to. Have you seen any closer to that five? We've talked about this as a board several times about maybe that 400,000 should be higher. Does that seem to be, reminiscent of what the DNR is having happen as well, or is that just people that talk to me?
Mr. Chair and Senator Lang, I think the reality is we have a lot of interest in the program as it is now. And so I think that's something that, we do keep tabs on to understand if those numbers should be adjusted or not. But, at this point, it's not that we don't have a lack of applicants. So if we raise that number, of course, that may increase the pool there as well. We also have a lot of folks who are under that $400,000 number. And so I think, part of what we'd have to weigh is if you increase that a little bit, do you encourage then some of those larger organizations, larger projects, and will that push some of the smaller ones out? So I think it's just something we need to, continue to monitor, continue to discuss, and continue to find that balance.
So I would just add, that's one of the things I would add to our list of things for us to discuss, because we've talked about, should it be 50,000 for the small grants, and what's the limit, and I think it would benefit all of us to really get into what's going on, what do the applications look like, from how many groups, for how much money, in what geographic distribution, and have a discussion about limits that we're frankly setting. So we may ask you to come back with your team to help us better understand exactly what the situation is so that we can then talk about what do we want.
Mr. Chair, and we'd be happy to do that. And I would also encourage you to include in that conversation some of the applicants, both, the applicants who have been successful, maybe applicants who have not been as successful, and folks who may still view that process as a barrier in order to ensure that we are making that program as accessible as it can be.
Great suggestion. Other comments, questions?
Mr. Chair, just one comment to follow up on that. I think Senator Lang made me think about something, that I hadn't mentioned earlier, which is, we're, whatever we are, 4/9 of the way through this amendment or something like that. But, we have not seen a lowering of demand for these dollars to do these types of projects. If anything, it's almost gotten harder. And I say that, I'm sure the commissioner can say that is true for the CPL program, and certainly I know you see that when you put out your request for proposals. And on the clean water side, and parks and trails too, the demand on the clean water side, we only get to fund, 1/4 of the things that we get coming forward, and so I think that's a good news thing because we're really still able to do very, very high quality projects and telling even really good ones that they won't have enough funding to get to them. But your point about being strategic around that, I think, is important. And maybe there are some things that we should pay, or take a look at just to make sure we're doing them as well as we can. So thank you for that.
Great, so I'll ask you the last question with my thanks for your being here, which is if you could give us one piece of advice of how we should do something differently, what would you recommend this council consider?
Don't say increase the CPL now.
Well, I go back to the multiple benefits thing. I think, if not that you would have to require that. I wouldn't go that far because I think there's really important things that you can do, and you're going to be able to, at the local level, you see how things make sense a lot more than you can sitting here in any room, far away from a place that you're really going to do a project. But it might be useful to have applicants, and I say this not only for your funding, but for the funding that we also, have in the other areas, is to describe if there's any other things that you could do to get other benefits out of this project, because sometimes a little bit more funding from one other source can make a lot more difference. I mean, if you can do a clean water project and you don't have to put any good grass or forbs in there, but if you do, you already got the footprint, and we can add, the pollinators, we can add, some other things that go with that. And so not to require it, because that would just stifle the process and make it more difficult, I think, for people to work on ideas that are going to, be practical. But I think it's maybe interesting to capture some of that information as you review proposals.
And Mr. Chair, along similar lines, what I was going to say is I think there's an opportunity to think about leverage in a little bit broader context. And I know the council pays close attention, and for good reason, as we've said, that leverage piece is important to sort of the dollars and cents side of the leverage. But I think there's an opportunity to think about leverage in a broader context. So are we leveraging multiple benefits? Are we leveraging dollars, certainly, but what kinds of dollars? Are we leveraging federal dollars that we wouldn't leverage otherwise? Are we leveraging local dollars that we might not get into the system otherwise? And then are we leveraging, conservation? Are we leveraging capacity as well? Are we bringing new partners and new people into this work? And so I just would encourage, as you review proposals and you think about how you evaluate, to think about leverage in a larger way.
Great. Thank you both for taking the time. I know you have busy schedules, but we appreciate you being here and having a dialogue with us. I'm sure we'll see you again.
I'm sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair and Council.
Look forward to coming back, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So next, we'll move to agenda item 9, Carnelian Creek Conservation Corridor request for extension. I want to point out we're actually ahead of schedule.
For now.
For now. That was an attempt to sort of keep the good stuff going. Go ahead.
All right. Good morning, Council Chair Hartwell, council members. My name is Wayne Ostile. I'm the Director of Land Protection at the Minnesota Land Trust. I'm here on behalf of the Minnesota Land Trust to request an extension to a grant that was awarded in ML 2017 for $2.458 million for securing conservation easements in the Carnelian Conservation Corridor of northern Washington County. Being handed around is a map that will give you some context into the geography that we're talking about. You'll notice red and yellow concentration of two main properties in the center of the image. The The northern portion being owned by the Manitou Fund as Warner Nature Center, the yellow as Wilder Foundation's Wilder Forest. Those two parcels were the focus of the initial proposal and accomplishment plan. The goal of that was to protect 735 acres of really high exceptional quality forest, bog, fen habitat, and essentially the entireties of three really pristine lakes in that geography. Terrapin Lake, which is the one that's largely in the orange block owned by or surrounded by Manitou Fund property, and Clear and Maze Lake surrounded by the Wilder Foundation property. The Wilder Foundation property also abuts two other lakes, East Boot Lake and Square Lake. In terms of habitat quality, this ranks up amongst the best in the Twin Cities Metro, and that's the reason why this was a focus of our conversation and proposal back for 2017. Also, a lot of very highly significant concentration of species of greatest conservation need, approximately 70 species either documented or the habitat in that area might support, nesting sandhill cranes, black bear, et cetera, which is pretty phenomenal given this is really part of the greater metro area. And most importantly, too, the project was supported by both May Township as well as Washington County Board, so it had that strong local support as well. The original project was going to be funded by kind of equal parts from the Outdoor Heritage Fund, Washington County's Land and Water Legacy Fund, and a donation of easement value by the Manitou Fund. Shortly after receipt of the funding, probably 3 or 4 months afterwards, as we were working to close the conservation easement over the top of the 735 acres, the Manitou Fund abruptly backed away from negotiations, due in large part to changes in its board structure at the time. In 2018, Manitou Fund once again approached the Land Trust to reopen negotiations related to the project, but again, after about 3 months, backed away yet again from the project. And so at this point in time, the Manitou Fund portion of the project in orange, we're no longer working to secure a conservation easement on that project at this time. Hopefully down the road something might materialize. So later in 2018, the Land Trust in Washington County opened discussions with the Wilder Foundation, that's the owner of the yellow property. And as you recall, this was also part of the original proposal. And so rather than working directly through the Manitou Fund, who was going to then acquire the Wilder property, we're now in the process of working through the Wilder Foundation directly. We've been working through that conversation, which has been complex because they want to sell the property. And so we're no longer just simply talking about securing a conservation easement over the ecologically significant portions of the property, but also have to work with parties to identify who's going to own the fee side of that equation as well going forward. And so at this point in time, there's about 5 parties involved. There has been renewed enthusiasm on the part of Wilder Foundation. This past month, we've met with them. They've expressed a desire to move this project forward. And so with that as a good sign, we wanted to bring this project to you and ask for essentially a 2-year extension that will enable us to work through this rather complex project and explore it in more detail. And so that's where the request for a 2-year addition is coming from. If that project doesn't go forward, we also have 3 other projects in this complex of habitat here in the Carnelian Creek corridor and adjacent Tanglewood that we are also exploring at this point in time. And you'll note that we are also requesting modification to the original $30,000 easement monitoring enforcement fund amount to elevate that to $120,000. And why that's important is because that's a number that's written into the appropriation language. And so it caps that amount. And to change it, you do have to go back to legislature. The $30,000 was effectively for the one project that we were going to do. And so if we're going to potentially pursue 4 or 5 projects, the larger stewardship fund amount would be required to make those projects happen. And so I just want to state that this request that we're making is still in keeping with the original appropriation language for easements in Washington County. So with that, I'll open it up for questions.
So my first question is, are you happy you got into this?
I will be
It's a little
happy.
more
I will be
challenging.
happy when we get a project closed on this because it's been a long undertaking, and so it's all worthwhile if we get the project done.
Questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Ostile, when you say you're in negotiations, what are the parameters for the value of a conservation easement, and how is that arrived at? And do you have a cap to where, no, we're not doing that?
The value is set through an appraisal where they look at it's basically 2 appraisals that are done. One is looking at comparable sales of like property, ideally in that geography, what sets the value for fee land without a conservation easement. Then they look at also comparable sales in terms of lands in that geography, again, ideally of similar size and so forth in that geography, to set, what's the value of a property with a conservation easement. So they look at properties with conservation easements that have sold. And the difference then is related to, that's the easement value. And so that sets the parameter in terms of what the value. It can vary widely as you go from geography to geography across the state in terms of what the percent of value an easement will have relative to, fee value. And also that's also affected by, the various constraints or things that you're actually acquiring. If in this geography, it's fairly high value property, highly developable property, areas with, lake shore and so forth, the values go up pretty significantly. And so, yeah, I mean, in terms of what we try to, as we go through most of ours, to kind of maximize the amount of, I'd say to use the state's resources efficiently and effectively to achieve the outcomes. So if you look back at the original proposal here, council was certainly putting in a significant amount of money to achieve a conservation outcome, but that was also leveraging equal contributions from Washington County into the mix, as well as donative value from the landowners into the equation as well. And so as we go forward, we'll try to, again, leverage those resources in that fashion.
Jamie?
I'm not sure who would be best to answer this question, but in regards to establishing an amount for establishing an amount for the monitoring and enforcement fund, is there a reason why that was specifically added to the bill language? Is there backstory there?
Mr. Chair, members, the amount that's set for the monitoring and enforcement fund has to be put into statute to allow it to be used for that. So if, for instance, they had extra or more easements than originally anticipated, they couldn't, 30,000 would be the cap that they could use for that. In this case, it'd be 120,000 is the cap, but that money can be, they can do budget shifts to move that into other activities within the project too. So it doesn't have to be only used, it's just availability in case there are other easements.
So originally there was one easement, now they're looking at multiple easements, and statutorily we have to add it to the bill. Is there a motion to approve?
So move.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Thank you. Next is Roseau Lake. Request for extension of the Roseau Lake Rehabilitation. Is Randy?
Randy, yes.
There he is. Okay. I didn't. Who's the- So I just want to let everyone know we have someone else who wants to comment on this. We're going to hear this presentation, we'll hear the comment, and then we'll get into discussion.
Mr. Chair. Just to that point, are you going to make an announcement to the audience if there's anybody, and you're going to let anybody in the audience that might be a landowner or something?
We had a request from a landowner to come down and appear, and we've given them 5 minutes in the agenda, but it didn't appear as a sub-agenda item.
Okay, thank you.
So go ahead, thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and members of the council. My name is Randy Prachar. I'm a wildlife manager for the DNR at Roseau River WMA. And with me today are members of the Roseau River Watershed District, Tracy Halstensgaard. Back here is Jason Broughton, and the engineer for the project, Nate Dallaker. We're here today to request an extension for the Roseau Lake project acquisition funds. This is a 2016 appropriation, and we have not, by the 30 June 2019 deadline for committing those funds to acquisition, we were not able to get that done. And I would just like to mention that that there's a number of reasons for that. It is a large, complex project. It has some of the complexity has to do with that we are trying to derive multiple benefits from this project. We have identified the two partners in the project, a sweet spot with the project where we have substantial wildlife management benefits in the basin, in particular creating shallow marsh habitat for water birds of various sorts, especially waterfowl, and also gain considerable flood control benefits. And so that's been complicated beyond what we might have expected. And I just make mention then that as an aside, this project is, everything we come to you on starts with Roseau. And it can get a little bit confusing. This is not the Roseau River Restoration Project that you were talking about a couple of months ago and potentially will be funded for the coming legislative session. This is an appropriation for Roseau Lake. Roseau Lake WMA and Roseau River WMA are two distinct WMAs. The restoration project is entirely in the Roseau River WMA. That's a stream restoration emphasis, and this is a shallow marsh emphasis in the Roseau Lake project. And thought it was important that I think we had a question last time we were here if they were linked, and they are not. The extension, the original appropriation was $2.763 million. We have spent $469,000 to date on professional services, engineering, archaeological survey. The Roseau Lake area has a lot of archaeological history, and that and also wetland delineation work associated with the project infrastructure, dikes, for instance, going through a wetland. So, you know, to bring this all together, and in the memo that goes along with our request for an extension, I go into more detail about the reasons why we're asking for an extension. Frankly, to boil it down, you cannot buy land until you know what you need, and until we have a dike alignment that we're settled on, and we are now, most 99% of the way there, it's unwise to buy land. So we simply didn't get to it yet. Having said that, we are ready to move on a couple of purchases, but now that the $770,000 of the in the accomplishment plan for this is not available, we're back here for an extension request. And by the way, those are willing sellers in those couple of cases, and we do have approval from the Roseau County Board of Commissioners to acquire those parcels. So all of the natural resources spending on this project is north of the river. If you would refer to your packet, there's the first figure shows dike alignments, and everything north of the river is where the natural resources money of any sort, including the Lessard funds, will be spent. You will also see a line, a dike south of the river. That is for flood control purposes, and there will not be any natural resources money spent south of the river. Just to clear up what we're doing here. That's the nuts and bolts of it. I don't want to lose in the fact of this that we've got tremendous project potential here. I mean, we're looking at a spring, summer, shallow marsh pool of 1,800 acres and going in excess of 3,000 acres in the fall when we get the water to do it of that basin north of the river. And right now, you sometimes get that. Many falls, you don't get that at all. And so we don't see anywhere near the benefits that we could have with water in the basin. And once again, I'll just add that we have the flood control benefit of the project to boot. And so I think that's our pitch.
Okay. I'd like to ask Mitch Magnuson to come down. He had asked for 5 minutes. He's a local landowner who doesn't want us to fund this project or grant an extension. I think it's important to hear from him, and then we can have a discussion. So Monica Doman is with him. Go ahead.
Okay. I'm just going to read some points I've made. My name is Mitch Magnuson. I'm a farmer, resident, and landowner in the area of the Roseau Lake proposed restoration project in Roseau County. I'm here to speak on behalf of the Roseau County Landowners Coalition. Landowners, many of them farmers, who are opposed to this project. The land in question is some of the richest land in the state, and I've been working it for over 50 years. I've seen and studied many floods during that time and have a very clear understanding how the system of the Roseau River and its surrounding areas work. I have a few points I would like to get across about this project and the opposition to the request for extension of funding. Number one, I've been on the project work team for this project as a landowner representative. I have sat in meetings multiple years run by the Roseau River Watershed District for this project in collaboration with the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources. My attendance at many project meetings over the years feels like a waste of time. The Watershed staff doesn't seem to want to hear my concerns or our concerns. They don't seem to care about the landowners. Two, I've heard on more than one occasion that the Watershed wants to take our property by eminent domain if we don't agree to sign flood easements or sell our property, which is very concerning to me. As you all know, This Lessard-Sams money cannot be used for eminent domain. So who is going to support such eminent domain? Although the funds approved by this council cannot be used for eminent domain, approval of this money encourages the Watershed and the DNR to find other money to take our properties. This seems really wrong. Most of us in the Roseau Lake area project don't want this project, so why does the state and Watershed continue to push for it? And why would this committee continue to approve funding for it? The Watershed and their engineering consultant have looked at all sorts of options for this project, but we are still waiting to see a map that clearly shows which properties will be affected by flooding after the project is completed and how much flooding will occur on adjacent projects. Number 6, one of the coalition members hired an attorney and engineer to get help. Nearly all the landowners stand behind conclusions by the engineer that this project is ill-conceived and will provide minimal additional wildlife habitat for recreational benefit. We as farmers may not be engineers, but we do understand how water flows and a bit about wildlife, as we live with both every day. The attorney and engineer and others have made reasonable requests for essential project information at the Watershed. Could not provide it. Late last Friday afternoon, I was finally given some information I had requested. At this stage in the project, it makes no sense that they withhold such information as to property they want, possible flooding impact on the property, on private agricultural land, and more. I've provided a letter with a petition signed by most of the landowners in the area opposing the project. We urge you to oppose the current request for funding extensions for this project and to cancel any further funding for this project. It's a waste of taxpayer dollars, and if this project is built, could make thousands of productive taxpayer acres unfarmable. Thank you.
Okay, great. With that, I would open it up to questions from the council to either the proposers or the landowners.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Magnuson, for coming forward. I appreciate that, and thank you for being involved in the process. What I do want to say is, if I'm not mistaken, we're funding the habitat and restoration work, and a lot of the discussion has been around the flood mitigation project, and we're not funding that, and we're not involved in that. I understand that they're related, but that part of the process is not ours. Ours is the habitat, restoration, and acquisition. And then again, to clarify, none of our money can be used for eminent domain. That's a different issue with the flood mitigation. And so we can only look at it from our side of it. I understand a lot of the controversy has been about the other part, but we're dealing with the restoration and enhancement work, and that's what the DNR is proposing an extension on. And I think that's what our discussion needs to be about. So thank you.
I would, oh, go ahead.
Just a clarifying point on the extension. Under the professional services, none of that's going to, there's no request for additional professional services. This is just an extension of the
I'm
project.
going to ask Mark to talk about exactly what this is.
Okay,
Because
thank
it's
you.
confusing and I forgot to.
Mr. Prachar, my understanding is it's just the extension, correct? That's all we've heard for a request on this.
Yes, it is. There's no request for additional funding.
Yeah.
Or to even move the funding between the various categories.
Yeah. There was a question whether or not the money, since it was expired for acquisition, would then be turned back immediately, but that doesn't happen until after the appropriation is closed, so.
So just to clarify, we approved this in the legislature. We recommended it, the legislature approved it in 2016. There were two components to the project. One was an acquisition component, which expired in 3 years, and one was restoration, which expired in 5 years. So the project is still alive. The request is to extend the acquisition piece for the same period of time that the restoration was originally granted for. Am I correct?
Yes, Mr. Chairman and members, and I'm sorry for failing to mention this earlier. I have in the request, ask for an additional year for all of the funds to 2022 rather than 2021.
Is that something we have the power to do?
We'd be requesting that the legislature.
Yeah, the legislature would have to approve that. We can recommend that to the legislature in our bill, just to be clear.
Thank you.
So the question that this brings up to me is, if I look at your handout with picture on number 4, it shows a big wetland flooded lake. I'm not sure which it is, but it would appear to me to be a flood area. You're trying to do a restoration in an area subject to flooding, and you're both trying to acquire property there, which will allow you to do, to control the water better, correct?
Yes, that area on that, actually, I'm going to ask one of the Watershed District people to come up and explain that, because that area largely is in the part of, it is south of where we're doing the natural
So-
resources work.
So the question that I have is, if you acquired half of what you want and you don't get the other half because the landowners aren't willing to sell to you, where does it leave the project?
So we could still move forward with the project north of the river as at minimum a phase of the entire project, and then continue to work with landowners. That is one option. We would prefer to, as we continue to work with landowners and continue to work through the process, our ultimate goal would be to get everybody to a place where they're comfortable with the project and acquire the required easements and purchase from willing landowners. And we'll continue to work on that.
But if you didn't, would you put a dike up so that it wouldn't affect the landowners who don't want to be part of the project? I'm just trying to understand how this happens, because you've obviously got some people who don't want you to do it. We're not going to support eminent domain. So how does this all play out if you end up with some people who don't want to play?
So if you look at the graphic on page 8, it shows this actually shows the heights of the or the embankment, but you can see there's a clearly defined embankment footprint on the north side of the river. Part of it in blue and red, and then the rest of it in the gray and yellows. And then there's the southern embankment, which runs around the lake on the south side. And what we would propose then, if there's absolute landowner objection to that southern portion, the Watershed Board at the final hearing for the project would have the opportunity to move forward with the project on the north side of the river, which would be a different alternative that is put forward, or move forward with the entire project using the eminent domain, which my board has not, contrary to previous testimony, has not committed to or mentioned, other than when it is brought up by various landowners.
So would you move your embankments to the south side of the river to keep?
No, we would construct that northern basin portion, which is majority public land now. Would be an option. I'm not saying that that's what the Watershed Board would choose to do at that time, but that is.
So you would essentially hold all the water north? I'm just trying to figure this out because I'm confused.
That, and maybe the engineer on the project has more to add.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the council. I think if you think about this as a project where these lands in question already flood, which many of the pictures in your package show, we are not proposing a project that would change the land use or impose flooding upon lands which do not flood now. This is a project that is intended to better manage how the lake operates, primarily for natural resources, but there is this flood control benefit as well. So as we've worked on this over the years to develop the different alternatives, one of the alternatives that is essentially still on the table would be simply that north embankment, which is almost entirely public land as we speak. There is a little bit of the willing seller land. I think it's on one of the last pages of your handout. And then there is a sliver of property that would be in question there that isn't publicly owned. But so just to be clear, that of the alternatives that we have, that alternative one option would essentially hold the water north of the river with an embankment functionally for the habitat benefits. And that south embankment, actually, which we refer to as alternative 2A, or in some cases 2A prime, because we've had lots of discussions, was actually as a benefit for landowners. That was a way to kind of encapsulate the project, possibly set the footprint. On one side you have the project, on the other side you don't. So I don't know if that helps Chairman Hartwell, but the project can be designed in many different ways, and in keeping it north of the river. In other words, if we acquire this land now, the project will have functionality in the future, I believe is your concern.
So why the opposition to what you're trying to do? Explain what the disconnect is between the local landowners who we've heard from, who've signed a letter, and what you're trying to do. Where's the rub? Well, you've heard their complaints. Tell me from your side where you think there is a disconnect here.
I think we have one of our figures shows that the land of 2 or 3 landowners is a bulk of the land that is in question. I was thinking about that. But we've been talking to them for years. We've made some progress on this. We moved a dike at one point that they were in support of, at least one of the individuals was. But there's a disagreement over, I think, over how the project will treat the water on the land. And I'm not sure what to say more about that. We've had the engineering to show that, and with an appropriate operating plan, we should be able to not make it any worse for anybody. But not everybody agrees with that.
Gene.
Just another question for clarification. Thank you for including the maps. We have petition of support and petition of opposition. Looking at the map that's provided with that indicates the acreage, total acreage of fee title acquisition as well as the flowage easement, is the 770,000 in the proposal? Is that for 100% of the 716 acres of fee title and the 2,930 acres of flowage easement? Or is that just a portion of that? Can you clarify that?
Just a portion of it. We have, from the Roseau County Board, they're very specific in their resolution granting us permission to acquire, and it's 2 parcels. It's the large one on the west side of the map. Right here. And then there's a 40 over on the east side of the lake that we've been given permission on.
Okay, one follow-up question, please. And of those 2 parcels, then, do you have support from those landowners
Yes.
for that? Okay, and then one more follow-up question. Of the landowners that are shown on this map as far as the fee acquisition and the easement, what percentage of support versus opposition do you have for those parcels that have been identified?
Mr. Chair and council members, I am not sure about percentage-wise. We've met with all of the landowners in the footprint of the property, and we had, other than the Mitch Magnuson, Terry Queen, Norman Queen, and a couple of landowners on the northwest side of the embankment that were skeptical and wanted to withhold either support or opposition to the project when we met with them. Everybody was on board with moving forward with the alignment, and when we met with them individually, we addressed individual concerns and stuff like that. So during those meetings, I would say probably if we met with 20 landowners, somewhere in there, we had 2 maybes and then probably 4 or 5 opposition, 4 maybe opposition.
So what's the council want to do? Is there a motion to approve this, or?
Mr. Chair, I'd make the motion to approve.
Okay? You have a comment? Sure.
I have a comment. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And, you know, when I was first elected back in 2010, I went to church one Sunday morning, and former U.S. Congressman and Commissioner of Agriculture, Secretary of Agriculture, Bob Bergland, and I had a conversation. And he said, you know, one of the things you're going to find out is that water is everyone's best friend and everyone's worst enemy, depending upon whether you have too much or not enough. Mitch, I want to thank you for coming down. You know that I respect you and your opinions and so forth. And I want to thank the Watershed and them for taking on a difficult project. I know that this is controversial. But I also think that it's important to look at the Roseau County Commissioner's resolution. One of the things that I talked to Mr. Queen, Terry Queen, last Thursday or Friday, had a fairly lengthy conversation with him. And one of the concerns has been this feeling, and Mitch has it in his presentation here, about not being listened to, being made to feel like you're not important or whatever. I'm putting a little bit of words in your mouth. The county commissioners have recognized that the Roseau Lake Rehabilitation Project moving forward is important, but they also emphasize in their resolution continued outreach to landowners. I think that that's important to continue doing that. I would hope that maybe even today at lunch we can go sit down together and have a bite to eat. I would hope that we can keep the conversation going. I would hope that we can find a settlement here that works for Mitch and the Queens and Ardell Magnuson, who wants to sell his land. We've been through this on the lake bottom ever since I moved to Roseau, basically. Ardell wanted to sell his land, and the county had a no net gain policy in place or whatever, and they actually wound up going to court over it, and Ardell won in court. I don't want to see this happen again in this project. But I also understand the value of flood mitigation. I lived through the flood in Roseau of 2002 and other high water events. We've seen how the diversion project works. I think that what we need to keep in mind is that there's a lot of people that are in favor of the project as well. I would hope that we can continue some conversations to see if we can't come up with some sort of an agreement that will move a project forward that has several benefits. So with that, I conclude my
Okay.
comments.
Any other discussion or comment?
Mr. Chair.
Could we just request that Mitch's verbal letter go on the record?
Oh, it's in the record. It's on TV even, you reading it, so.
You're a celebrity.
Yeah.
Tell him to go to the mic.
Make another short little statement?
Sit at the table with the microphone.
I noticed. I did notice that there's some question on how this project is going to work. I just thought I'd give you a little background. I don't have the maps that you guys are looking at and such, but historically, the north basin of the Roseau Lake project has been flood control for the lands to the south and the east of the project for decades, since the river was dredged at turn of the century. After project completion, this water storage area will no longer be available for the agricultural lands to the south basin and to the east. There will be a block in that lake ditch. So that water will have to go down the river or to the south, from my understanding. To store 4,000 acres or 8 to 10,000 acre feet of water out in that area, and we get a flood event like we had this fall, I cannot help but believe it's only going to hurt only that area immediately, but all the areas downstream, which had major problems, and it flooded thousands of acres of beans, and just to have more in that lake bottom. Everybody, all the landowners I talked to, do not agree that it's a good place to put it.
All right, thank you. Yep.
And to his point, I think that's the important, Mr. Magnuson, for you to work with the watershed, and I really appreciate you've been part of the process, because what we don't want is for you to have a different opinion of what's going to happen. Engineers should agree on what they think might happen. Granted, we don't know for sure, and there's going to be flooding, but it's not good if different parties that are involved up there, different neighbors, have a different understanding of what the impact's going to be. We can agree to disagree. Sometimes we don't know what's going to happen, but some of it can be factual that we can agree what some of the impacts will be. And so thank you for being involved in the process, and I would encourage you to continue to be involved. Believe you me, from somebody that's been involved in the public process, most of us at the table here, all of us do know, it's frustrating at times, and thank you for being involved, and I would encourage you to continue so you do get an understanding. You've lived there, your family's lived there, I can see your names all over on this, and so I would appreciate, or I do appreciate, especially driving down here for 7 hours in some crappy roads, so thank you. It's
And back.
And back, you gotta be safe driving home. So, thank you. I don't want you to feel that you're shorted. We're dealing with the habitat part, and it sounds like the flood mitigation is frustrating. And I can't imagine after the year you've been through, and this year has been the worst forever, so thank you.
If it wasn't important to me, I wouldn't be down here.
And we truly do appreciate, everybody's intention here is good. So with that, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. All right, next is easement monitoring and appropriation and enforcement funds on the St. Croix Watershed Habitat Protection and Restoration Phase 1.
I was in Roseau. You were in Washington.
Doesn't look like Monica.
Do we go sandbag our home or go sandbag the plant?
Mr. Chair, members, good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to present to you today. I'm Bob McGillivray, the Land Protection Director for the Trust for Public Land, and I have Martin Jennings with Fisheries with me as well, and Monica Zachay with the St. Croix River Association is in the audience. We're here today to ask for an amendment to an ML19 appropriation for the St. Croix Watershed Program that would allow stewardship funds to be given to DNR. First of all, I want to thank you all for funding this program. We believe it's very important work. I'll explain just a little bit of the background on how we got here. As we were working on putting a proposal together for this partnership, we reached out to various agencies as to what their priorities were in the watershed for protection. And when I spoke with Fisheries, something that they highlighted was that there was really a need to do some trout stream easements in this area. There were a couple of really important brook trout streams that needed some easements. So we included as a small part of our proposal to do some trout stream easements that would be transferred to DNR to hold permanently. At the time, we were not aware that DNR needed stewardship funds to be able to monitor and enforce these easements. In speaking with DNR this last summer, after the appropriation was made, we discovered that they did not have other funds that they could fund these activities with. So that is why we are here today, which is to ask for a small portion, $20,000 of the existing appropriation from ML19 to be able to be used by DNR for stewardship. So it's not an increase in funding, it's just allowing us to use those funds to be able to give to DNR for stewardship. So this would be included in this year's bill that would go to the legislature to make that amendment to the ML19 appropriation.
Okay?
Thank you.
Is everyone clear what's being asked for? Are there any questions or discussion? Would anyone like to make a motion?
So moved.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you very much.
Get it right next time, the first time, okay?
Will do.
So, members, I want to ask you what you want to do here. We can go directly into our discussions about money, or we can take a half an hour for lunch. But it is critically important that there are 9 of you here that will vote in favor of the package when we get to that point, or we do not have a recommendation that goes to the legislature.
Where's Thomasoni leave?
He said he was likely to leave at some point, so he didn't tell me what that was.
He took his coffee cup.
Oh, yeah, his cup is gone.
He gave his $1.5 million to me.
Is it okay if we continue and work through lunch? Is that acceptable to everyone versus breaking and coming back? Okay,
I don't want to be.
5-minute break.
5-minute break. Yep.
I would just say sometimes the staff have opinions too, and they're not necessarily going to be speaking up, but if they have an opinion about whether.
What is your opinion?
I think we are flexible, Mr. Chair. Yeah.
Okay, we'll get back at 12:30. So you've got a bio break time.